Hi, today we're going to be talking about a quarrelsome wife. What does that mean? And am I quarrelsome? Are you quarrelsome? What does that mean? And how do we deal with that in marriage? It could be a huge hindrance in our marriages. Stay tuned.
You don't want to miss it.
You're listening to Marriage Mania, where we are audacious, sagacious, and tenacious for the Lord to uphold godly marriages and to raise fervent children who are countercultural and stand for biblical truth.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Tanya.
And Michael.
And today we're going to be talking about a quarrelsome wife. Like, what does that mean? And is that me or is that you if you're a woman, a wife specifically? Or I think you can kind of become quarrelsome even in your singleness. So what does that mean and how does that impact your marriage? That is a key question here. But before we get started, please subscribe here. It helps us to get the message out. We want to reach as many families as possible for the gospel. And we also want to mention we have Bible studies. We have 2 Bible studies, one called The Covering, the Role of Biblical Husband, and The Helper, the Role of Biblical Wife. And it's really focused on marriage and building up each other in the Word of God and understanding what your biblical role is in marriage. So let's get started. Michael, I wanted to talk to you about quarrelsome, the word quarrelsome, because, just to kind of go back a little bit with the helper, the role of biblical wife, the word quarrelsome came up in the Bible study. And I actually, when I wrote it, I was like, I'm not quarrelsome. Like, come on. What does that even mean? So let's look at the definition of what quarrelsome means. Quarrelsome is a contentious, critical, easily irritated, complaining, and nagging woman. And I don't think it's necessarily woman. I think a man could be quarrelsome as well.
Yeah, anybody can be quarrelsome. Certainly.
Yeah, so maybe not just specifically, a woman, but we're talking about the role of a wife right now and just how that impacts in the marriage. But I think it can kind of go both ways, right?
Yeah, well, it was written by Solomon, right?
Yeah, so Solomon, he wrote it.
Who had 1,000 wives.
Yes.
So he was probably a little stressed out when he wrote that, probably. And he was like, it's better to be in the corner of a housetop than with a quarrelsome wife.
Exactly. And that's Proverbs 26.
There you
20.
go.
So let me go back to what I was talking about. Okay, so we define what quarrelsome is, but in the Bible study, there is a section about being quarrelsome. And I just have to share this because it's kind of funny. So my friend and I, we were doing the Bible study because I wrote this for my friend, Jekka, which it ended up being impactful to me and so many other women around the world. And we were looking at each other. This is before it actually went out live to everyone. And we looked at each other when we got to this lesson. And we're like, we're not quarrelsome. It's like, how could I be quarrelsome? I am so good with my husband. And she was like, yeah, I am too. Like, that is for other people who cause trouble and cause issues in the marriage. And so I came home that day, remember? I was like, hey, this is hilarious. I was like, we're not quarrelsome people. And you're like, everybody's quarrelsome. I was like, oh no. He's like, you're quarrelsome. Jekka's quarrelsome. We're all quarrelsome. I'm like, oh man. So I remember I went back to Jekka and I was like, hey, we are quarrelsome. And she's like, what do you mean? I don't cause any issues with my husband. I'm like, well, do you complain? And she's like, I was like, well, do we nag our husbands for, hey, did you get that done? Did you get that done? Did you get that done? Do we nag our husbands over and over? Do we try to control our husbands because they're not getting something done that we have high expectations to get it done right now? Like, you could probably relate to that. I need you to do this right now. Like, stop everything that you're doing.
Yeah, everything's always right now.
Right
yes.
now. Yeah, do it right now. And do we quarrel? Like, do we, and it doesn't necessarily mean like, you can go an extreme, right? So you can have an argumentative wife who is just like, I ain't going to do what you're telling me to do. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And that could lead to this quarrelsome title, but also just a hindrance, right? A hindrance of like, the husband's the leader and he's saying, I believe God is telling us to do this. No, he's not, because he's telling me to do this. And I think that can cause that title of quarrelsome. So, I wanted us to have a conversation around this word and how do we deal with this in marriage? Because we should be prayerful about our marriages. We should be prayerful about our roles. Because I know I was convicted around being quarrelsome. And again, there's extremes, and then you've got the titles of quarrelsome where you're like, okay, Lord, I need to work on these areas of my life. So yeah, this is our topic today. What do you think?
Dangerous territory.
Yes.
But I think, to me, it brings to mind that it's being quarrelsome is so easy to identify in someone else.
Except for yourself.
And not yourself. Because it really jumps out at you when somebody's being quarrelsome with you and you're like, okay, I guess it's beat up on me time right now. And let me just sit here and either take it or let me get into the fray and dish it right back or, whatever. But I recognize this person's unloading on me right now. And it's so easy to identify in someone else. And, do we examine ourselves enough to say, do I quarrel? And is there a better way to handle disagreements than being quarrelsome, to be nagging, to be argumentative? The experts say that.
Who are these experts?
Right. I mean, the health of a marriage is directly determined by how well you handle conflict in marriage, because everybody's going to have conflict, meaning disagreements in a marriage. And how are you going to handle those disagreements largely determines the health of your marriage. Being quarrelsome is not a healthy way to handle disagreements. It just creates a lot of issues in the marriage. And if there's any area where we need to be experts in, it's in the area of what they call conflict resolution, to just use good disagreement discussion techniques to present an issue to our spouse in a kind way and solve the problem together, attack the issue and not the person. Being quarrelsome attacks the person.
Yeah, and I think that also leads to having a critical spirit, right? So being critical about everything, oh, you didn't do this right. Oh, you didn't do that right. And I will go ahead and put myself under the bus because at the beginning of our marriage, I remember, there's a lot to deal with when you're first getting married. You're trying to figure out like what, how are you working in this marriage? And it's not about me. It's not about you. It's about us. And, it's kind of hard to figure all that out at the very beginning of your marriage. And so, one of the things that I did do is I was a little critical. I was critical and I cannot stop thinking about that moment when you told me, we were talking about it. And then I think you were just kind of quiet, kind of learning. It might've been the first 6 months of our marriage. I remember we were talking and I was being critical. And again, I'm putting myself under the bus. And you said, stop having such a critical spirit. And I remember that so clearly that it convicted me deeply, where I was like, Lord, I remember kind of like that puppy face going in like my own little space and just being sad about it. Like, okay, obviously I am not doing something well in my marriage and I just got rebuked in a way. It's a good thing, but I got rebuked and I wanted to go in the corner and just kind of cry to the Lord, like, help me address my heart issue because I'm used to doing things my way. And now it's about us. And so I think, if those things are not addressed and we're not really seeking the Lord to ask the Lord to help us in our hearts, then those critical spirits will continue. Those quarrelsome attitudes will continue. And you'll never be able to address them because you'll just be so focused on the other person rather than allowing God to transform your own heart in areas that you still need maturity. And so I just think that being a quarrelsome wife, I don't have it perfect at all. And there are some things that I come to you and I'm like, did you get that done? Did you get that done? I need you to get that done. And, I find myself, okay, I'm kind of nagging here when I need to stop and trust and know that, okay, you're going to get that done. And I need to trust that if it's 2 days, 3 days, a week, or 3 weeks, that it will get done because my actions reflect to our child, our children, if you have children, our daughters specifically, because I know with our daughter, I'm having to say, hey, one time, only ask one time, or we don't need to bug dad. Like, just ask that question one time and allow it to happen when your dad responds. And so I think those are things that we need to teach as well. My convictions and teaching those to our daughter as well.
Yes, yes, and it just kind of brings up to mind, that research has found that most husbands when they are being confronted with quarreling will either do one of two things: either they'll shut down or they'll explode, and most often than not they shut down, and it's like they go silent. I know I do because the only things that are going on in my head are usually not good for me to vocalize. So it's better for me to just be quiet and control any outbursts and such. And so you can look for those signs, and as far as nagging, I guess it could be helpful if you have some confidence that the husband will get around to it. I know for me, I mean, when you ask me to do something, it goes to the top of the priority list, but it may not be something that I can do right now. And I've got to work out in my schedule how to get it done as fast as I can, if in a guy's mind, if for no other reason than to get you off my back. And maybe that's what kind of inspires nagging. Because if I know I do it, they'll just do it just because, I'll stop nagging them. But it's like, it goes to the top of the priority list, but that doesn't mean I can necessarily do it right now. I'm right in the middle of something. I'm right in the middle of a thought. When can I work it into my schedule as soon as possible? But, there's things that have to be done first, oftentimes, where it's just crucial. There's a deadline or whatever, and has to be done, and still has to be worked into the schedule at some point. And so, if there's got to be some patience on one end, and then on the other end, just knowing that, okay, when I let him know, I know he'll actually get to it without me nagging. I know on his own, he's going to put it on his schedule and get to it. It won't just be ignored. So I have that confidence as well, that I don't have to keep reminding, because he's got it in his to-do list. It's on the calendar. So it works out both ways. There's give and take on both sides. And that's how we become one. We work as one.
Yeah, I love that. And also, there is one more topic I want to bring up around quarrelsome is, I don't think I've done this, but I hope not. But there are women out there who get very frustrated because they feel like their husbands aren't leading. And we do have a podcast about leading and the passive husband, where we're not bashing the husband, but we're talking about why these things can happen. But it's the frustration of a wife nagging, saying, I noticed that so-and-so's husband is leading, why can't you lead like that? Or why can't you lead us? Why aren't you reading the Bible? Why aren't you doing these things? And, wives get really frustrated. I don't think I've ever said anything like that to you. And if I have, please remind me, but I don't think that that's been that type of conversation in our marriage, because I do trust in your leadership. But there are women that we talk to in our ministry where they are frustrated and they're almost pushing their husbands along, like, hey, you can lead us this way or this. And ultimately they're leading, but they're being quarrelsome about it by pushing and nagging. And I think that can lead to some serious arguments and some serious issues in the marriage where the husband becomes quiet and just his confidence is like, well, since you're leading, we'll let you go ahead and move forward. You tell me what to do. And then they give up their godly role as husbands where God intended them to lead. And I don't want to get into the leadership conversation per se, because that's another topic in our other podcast, but more of the quarrelsomeness of pushing an agenda that causes the husband to get so frustrated that he's just like, that's it. I'm done. Like, I'm just going to be over here and you tell me what to do. And that leads to nagging, that leads to potential arguments in the marriage.
Right. And here's what's going on inside of most husbands, and it's borne out by research, and it's probably why the God's commands for wives to respect their husbands, to have a respectful tone with their husbands, because this kind of posture of quarreling, nagging, just being very argumentative is deflating to the spirit of a man. And like I said before, that will have negative side effects in a number of ways. Either they'll go silent, they may what they call stonewall, they may go for a walk to kind of calm down, or they may explode, because usually what they've found in research when they put electrodes to the men to see what's going on inside, their blood pressure is going through the roof during arguments. And it's interesting because usually the wife, everything is the same. Their vitals are staying the same, but the husbands, their blood pressure is going up, their heart is racing, and so that's what's going on inside. So they'll either go with that and explode, or they'll recognize it and shut down, because they know what, if they say anything, it's not going to come out well, because you've sparked that fight or flight in them with that posture. And so they'll do one of those two things. They'll either flee, either mentally by disengaging, or literally go walk out the door, or they'll get in fight mode, which means, they don't want to literally fight you, so they might break something in order to get that out. So that's what's going on inside of a man during those kind of quarreling, nagging, argumentative kind of tones. They don't want to be there in that space with you. They feel like they're being treated like a child. They don't want to be bossed around. They don't want to be. They're seeing the children being nagged and told what to do, and it's like, I'm not a child, I'm your partner in life for one thing, and I'm supposed to be the leader of the home, and this is not how you treat a leader of the home. This is how you're treating the child over here. And so it's just not good side effects, even if in the moment they did what you want them to do because you nagged them and they want to get you off your back. The deflation of the spirit does not produce good side effects in the marriage as a whole, and it will present itself negatively in other ways that you don't want. And so it's very important for both sides that we handle our disagreements in a way that is very loving and very respectful. Because if you know Emerson Eggerich's Love and Respect, when guys feel disrespected, they then dish it back in unloving ways, and you cause what's a crazy cycle. But if we just, we sit down and say, can I talk to you about something? There's something that's bugging me, and I really want to talk this with you. Is this a good time? Yes, it is. And you actually sit down. You're not standing up in a posture. You are sitting down, maybe even hold hands, and you start out with a soft startup. I just want to, maybe even an apology. I want to just apologize for something that I've been doing, and I want to talk to you about something. And you arguments end the way they start. You start soft, they'll end soft, and you'll attack the problem. You're gonna more than likely come up with a solution, and whatever happens in that discussion, the marriage wins because you had a loving discussion about something you disagreed on, and that can even bring the marriage closer than anything else. But any kind of arguing, any kind of yelling, nagging, being quarrelsome, argumentative, all of that breaks
the spirit. And as Solomon said, it's better to be in a corner of a housetop than that. It's deflating to the marriage, and you don't want to go there. It's very important that we handle our disagreements in a very loving and respectful way that builds up a marriage, whereas the opposite tears down a marriage.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like building good habits by having those good conversations and being grateful for one another and having great communication skills, because that communication breakdown will even cause more frustration in the marriage. But so, yes. So the biggest thing to take away here is, are you quarrelsome? And if you are you taking that to the Lord? Are you asking the Lord to help you and guide you and convict you, to help you better your marriage? But not just that, but yourself, having your heart being transformed in the image of Christ continuously, and having him speak to you by being in his word. And that's ultimately where our healing comes from, is from God's word. And, we're always here to be transformed. We're always learning something new. As we seek the Lord, he shows us more and more of our sin. And so we just have to bring it to him. And especially in our marriages, we want to be able to build our marriages up and not tear them down. So being a quarrelsome wife or a quarrelsome person is not something that you want to be. Nobody wants to be around that, especially if you're a very contentious person, critical and argumentative. It doesn't help anyone. And so, especially in marriage, we want to make sure that those things are addressed fairly quickly and just building up each other. And so we wanted to just talk about this podcast today about being a quarrelsome wife or just being a quarrelsome person if you're single. But we specifically focused on the wife in marriage because Solomon wrote many proverbs around the rooftop and the dripping of the water on the rooftop, being a quarrelsome wife. So we hope that this was encouraging to at least evaluate your heart and identify those areas that need to be taken to the Lord. Give us a thumbs up on this podcast. We do have a podcast that goes out every Tuesday where we talk about marriage and family. And don't forget, we do have Bible studies that focus on marriage, the role of a biblical husband and the role of a biblical wife. You can find that on marriagemaniaministry.com. And stay tuned until next time.
God bless.